Now you've got to grips with the layout of the style panel in Nordcraft, we're going to use the next lessons to dive a little deeper into the inner workings of CSS to equip you with the knowledge to start building websites with confidence. The first and most important concept we're going to cover is that everything in CSS is a box. Every box consists of 4 parts: content, padding, borders, and margins. The content is the content of the box, such as text or images. The padding clears an area around the content. The border goes around the padding and content, and the margin clears an area outside the border. This is known as the CSS box model. On this example in the Nordcraft editor, I have a box. The content is this paragraph element. The box has a padding of 40 pixels, clearing an area around that content. The box has a border of 10 pixels, which falls outside of the padding, and it has a margin of 40 pixels, clearing an area outside of the border. We can change these values to watch the layout change. For example, changing the margin top value clears more space at the top. Changing the top and bottom padding clears more vertical space around the content. And changing the border width pushes the space around the box out further. All of these layout changes are being calculated on the fly by the CSS box model in combination with the CSS display property, and more on that in the next lesson, and the box sizing property, which is responsible for calculating the resulting width and height of the box. The CSS box sizing property can be one of 2 values, border box or content box, and the differences only take effect when there is an explicit width or height set on the box. For this demo, I've set a width and height on this box of 200 pixels. The current box sizing value for this box is border box. This means that width and height values apply to the entire box, meaning the padding and borders are included in the calculation. If I hold Alt on my keyboard and hover the box, you'll see that the width and height are 200 pixels as I specified in the CSS. Now, when changing the box sizing property to content box, you'll notice that the box gets bigger, even though the specified width and height values are still 200 pixels. This is because when using content box, the specified width and height only controls the size of the content area, not the entire box. As a result, the space taken up by the padding and border get added on top of that. If I hold Alt on my keyboard and hover over the box now, the total calculated width and height is 300 pixels, not 200 pixels, because the padding and border size are being added to the final size calculation. This adds an extra 100 pixels to the final size, 40 pixels of padding plus 10 pixels of border, adding up to 50 pixels on each side. Now, whilst all of this is good to know, you probably won't need to think about which box sizing property to use when building in Nordcraft. And this is for 2 reasons. When building responsive and fluid layouts, which we'll cover in a later lesson, you won't usually need to define specific widths and heights on elements. And the default box sizing for all elements in Nordcraft is border box, so you don't ever need to add this CSS property in your CSS in the style panel. Now, there may be some small cases where you'll need content box, but in over 20 years of building for the web, I've never needed it. So in my experience, you probably won't either. The most important thing to remember is how the box model is constructed and the 4 components that make up the box: content, padding, border, and margin. One final thing to mention on this topic is the concept of block and inline boxes. Block boxes take the full width of the page regardless of their specified width. They stack on top of each other vertically, and their margins apply around them vertically and horizontally. My demo box here is a block box with the CSS display property of block. If I duplicate the box, you'll see that each box stacks on top of the next, including the margin around them. In contrast, inline boxes are stacked horizontally. Here I have 2 inline boxes. Horizontal margins do apply to inline elements, indicated here by the orange strip, but vertical margins do not. Additionally, the top and bottom padding may only appear visually depending on what's above it, because the line spacing of the paragraph doesn't expand to fit it. That's why the top of these inline boxes are not lined up with the top of the parent container. One final note is that most web browsers come with a box model visualization inside their browser dev tools, which can be really useful in debugging why your layouts may not be working as expected. The next lesson will dive deeper into the different CSS display properties, including block, inline, and flex.